So everyone, hi, welcome back. It is great to feel so much energy in the room at 4 o'clock. I don't have a crystal glass to tick against. Good, thank you. Welcome everyone.
If you don't have a map with a partner, raise your hand, we'll bring one to you.
So while the maps are getting passed around, I wanted to give you some background in this session. First, to thank all of you for being here. This is Collective Impact for Peace, Part 2. And to give you a little bit of context, about a year ago, after working closely with Rob for quite a while on systems thinking around peace building, we thought we need to better understand our system as a peace building field in order to understand the blockages to our message coming across more forcefully, the obstacles to collective impact, but also to show where are the points of leverage, where if we could overcome some of our organizational silos, we could really start to put our shoulder to the wheel and to have an outsized impact for peace building. So Rob very generously worked with us on a systems workshop about a year ago, assisted by Nikolai and his colleagues at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where there's a graduate program in Masters in Sustainable Peace Building. And we started to create a systems map of the peace building field as we saw it. And as Rob will tell you, a map just tells one story. This was a pretty small group within AFP that has started to map this. But we created a first version of the map, which we then refined. We came back at our last board meeting in June and refined it further, held a strategic workshop in June with a larger cross-section to refine it even more. And with a caveat that this is not an international map, we didn't have feedback from hundreds of people, we're putting this out really as a story that we can all start to comment on and influence and think about how we can all work together. So that's a little bit of the story of how this came together. Now, between last October and now, of course, we've had a cataclysmic change in Washington. So the stories around militarization, the policy community are quite different. But I think they only highlight what we're seeing in the map. And we really have been looking to this year for a strategic arc to create this map, to come together as a community here at the conference, and then move to a new level of effectiveness in the field. So that's just a little bit of the background and the impulse behind this. And now I'll turn this over to Rob and Nikolai.
Great, thanks, Melanie.
You got them.
I'm self-mic'd. Thanks, everybody. I'm impressed that you're all here. I should start by saying that when we do these, the session that we're going to do a little quick version of today is something that's part of a longer process, which I'll describe in a minute. And we're basically breaking every rule of how to do that process well. But I never liked rules anyway, so I have a hard time following them, so I guess it's natural that we're going to do this together. So I want to say a little bit about the overall approach very quickly, talk a little bit about, I'm going to I think Melanie hit the points about why AFP is doing this, but I'll talk a little bit more about that, and then Nikolai and I are going to walk through the product of the map, the content of the map. I want to assure you that we have all these copies of the map not because we love the map. I mean, all maps are wrong. They are always wrong. No matter how good they are always wrong. They're mental images of a very complex, dynamic situation, which is so fluid, right? As soon as you put it down, it's wrong, right? Even if you got it right, which you can't do. What we're looking for is a minimally viable understanding of what is the complex system that we are all engaging with in our individual efforts in the peace-building field, and with the hypothesis, as Melanie alluded to, that perhaps if we had a common sense of what the system looks like, we could begin to actually self-organize in ways that are mutually reinforcing. Also building on some of the work we talked about with narrative, maps are, thanks to Kumu, which is an online platform that we use to build these maps, look great. Like, I have a house at home that's wallpapered in just maps. It's really spectacular. But they're really stories. Think of the map as like a table of contents for a very rich story. And we'll go, Nikolai and I'll go through that in a minute. I want to recognize the work that Nikolai has done and his colleague Quinn Stout, who are in the master's program that Melanie mentioned, and then also call out the team from the Master of Sustainable Peacebuilding program that's here. So Tim Ellinger, who is the brains behind the whole operation, the one who makes it all happen. Joanne, Sarah Ellinger, Kim Ellinger, Joanne Lebozovic, Sarah Ellinger. I think Marissa's here. Marissa Jablonski. So these are great people, and without whom none of this would be possible. So thank you very much. Also because they helped actually put the stuff on the walls, which was the real hard work. Thanks a lot. I'm sorry if I'm kind of speeding through this, but time is not on our side in this exercise that we're trying to do today. So let me talk a little bit about the approach as a whole. So the language that we use within Omidyar, for those of you that don't know the Omidyar Group, it's a family of both commercial and social change philanthropic organizations that are funded by Pierre and Pam Omidyar. Pierre is the founder of eBay, so thank you for your contributions to the larger Omidyar endowment through your use of eBay. And I work with my team works with the range of initiatives across Omidyar, and we've been at this for about 3.5 years. So this is the product of a lot of that work. There's a lot of other resources I can give you in a minute or at the end of the session. The language we use internally is basically borrowed from Karl Popper, who wrote a piece that many of you may know called Of Clocks and Clouds, basically saying there are sort of two types of phenomena or two types of problems in the world. Those that work like clocks. They're mechanical, they're understandable, they're knowable, they're predictable, and most importantly, they're fixable. And there are others that work like clouds. They're infinite, like they don't have a beginning and an end, they're an always. They're ever-changing, they're unpredictable, they're uncontrollable, and you can't take direct action on whatever problem you face, because the problems you face are the outputs of very complex and dynamic systems. Right? That's the cloud world. And when I was called into Omidyar, it was basically because they said, we think we need to do a better job dealing with the cloud world. Because the problem they are encountering is the problem that most of us have, which is we apply clock-like fixes to cloud-like problems. Right? So think about, the quick example would be losing a few pounds. It's kind of a clock problem. We know how to diet, we know how to exercise, we know how to have scales. We have doctors and other nutritionists that can help us do that. If that's a clock problem, the cloud version of that is living a healthy lifestyle, like health. It's not like I can lose 5 pounds next week or by the end of next week, and I can feel great about it, mission accomplished. Living a healthy lifestyle is, if I'm healthy today, it's an always, right? It doesn't mean I'm going to be healthy tomorrow. So part of what we need to do is actually have approaches that deal with that deeper complexity. There's a great misquote that I love from Oliver Wendell Holmes, actually from his father, which uses lots of old English-y type language, but I'll give you the simple version, which is, I would not give a fig for simplicity on this side of complexity. I would give my life for simplicity on the other side of complexity. So what we're trying to do is actually build an approach that's accessible and usable for engaging with the cloud and actually getting clarity on the other side. So that's the... Actually, let me, sorry, back up a second. I want to give you a quick 2.5-minute video, which it was in response to a question that Pierre Omidyar asked me a few years ago when I presented him the brilliant sort of slide deck I'd put together on systems change, and he said, you're missing slide 1. And I said, well, actually, Pierre, it was the first slide. You might have missed that, but there actually was a slide 1. And he said, no. He said, all your slides are about how to do this. You had no slide about why to do this. So it took about 1.5 years, and it produced this 2.5-minute video to finally answer the question. So here's our internal articulation to ourselves as to why we do this work.
At the Omidyar Group, we are dedicated to fostering healthy societies where empowered and compassionate people can thrive.
Together, our work has contributed positive, meaningful value to the world. But sometimes we wonder, will it get us to the enduring change we are ultimately hoping to see?
There are times when we encounter roadblocks. It can feel like the movie Groundhog Day when, despite our solutions, we see the same problems over and over again.
Or, when we solve one problem, another pops up somewhere else, like a game of whack-a-mole.
Most confusing of all is when we find ourselves in opposite day, where our solutions somehow end up making things even worse.
It's what some blood banks found when they tried to increase donations by paying donors. But they found that this actually demotivated altruistic people, which led to fewer donations overall.
Or take homelessness. People have poured resources into funding shelters to address homelessness, but in many large cities, this didn't reduce the overall number of people ending up on the streets. The question is, why?
It's because shelters were never meant to provide a path to sustainable living, and because job training programs can't make a dent if there are no economic opportunities.
And no one program can address the underlying challenges. These factors are all interconnected and interwoven.
This is a truer representation of reality, but it's confusing, frustrating, and messy. It can be hard to know what to do with this mess.
So we've challenged ourselves to add to our toolkit. We believe that systems thinking can help. Systems thinking is a mindset, a collection of tools, and processes for engaging with our messy world.
Systems thinking helps us gain clarity by making sense of complex environments and understanding the interconnections.
It helps us find leverage and reveal points in a system where modest actions have the potential for significant impact.
It helps us adapt so we can engage with constantly changing environments and see the ripple effects of our actions within the broader context of the system.
Together, systems thinking helps us to gain clarity about a complex problem in order to find leverage, so we may act strategically with confidence. When we see the effects of our actions on the system, we learn and adapt, and these lessons fuel a virtuous cycle.
We've looked.
So that's our why. Like, that's why we do this. And what we've built is this sort of journey for what the process looks like. And what Melody described in terms of the interviews and the focus groups and so on was at that gain clarity stage, where we're actually trying to understand the system. Now, you never get a complete understanding, right? It takes a system to understand a system. It would be great to have started out with a group this size. We would have a much better map now if we had. We think what we've got is a minimally viable understanding of the system to support the next step, which is how do we find opportunities for leverage? And the key here is, rather than the traditional, I ran an NGO, and so this is a self-reflection as much as anything else, is that you basically have a hammer and you're looking for the nails, right? You've got things you can do and you're looking for places to do them. So what we do is actually starts with us and goes out, versus actually start with the context and look for the opportunities, and then we figure out what we can do and what are the opportunities to engage that context. That's what this session's about, is can we begin to start to identify where there's leverage in the system. We've got a whole process for that, and that's the exercise we're going to walk you through in a couple minutes. Let me talk a little bit. Melanie's covered this, but this is how we started out, with an idea of what is the guiding star? What is it, the ultimate change we want to see in the world, knowing like a good guiding star? We're never actually going to get to the star, but it's going to help us navigate. Our near star is what we think is a good, decades-long, perhaps, outcome that we'd like to see. And the challenge AFP had was, how can they help enable our membership to take high-leveraged collective action to improve the impact and the health of the field. These will all be available to everybody. I work for a Silicon Valley person, so there is no intellectual property. Nothing is, the videos, you can have it all. So there's three things that I think are going to help advance that challenge here at AFP. So I'm going to talk through what those are. So the idea of aligned intelligence, that in order to change a system, we need to have various players in the system across sectors and across levels from very local to global, have a somewhat aligned, common, holistic view of the system they're acting in. So partly what we're trying to do with this is hold up a tuning fork. So it's like when we hit a tuning fork, everyone can play different instruments, but you're playing to a common tune, pitch. I'm not a musician. I don't know. I can't use that analogy any further. That doesn't work. So if we understand what the system is, we begin to get some ideas of how to engage it. So literally what our teams do is map their strategies onto their systems maps. Once you've got that, you can start to think about, well, how do we take sort of aligned action? So we can be doing different things and engaging different parts of the system. And what's really helpful about the map is it's a bit like a baseline of a patient. you can then come back and say, what have we learned? What feedback do we get? What was the impact of our action? So our teams go through, you can't read any of that, but basically they go through an exercise where they assess what were their assumptions, what did they learn, what are the impacts for strategy, how do they change their map, how do they change their strategy. So at a macro level, there's a potential that AFP and the community of peace builders that we represent and include can actually do that as a field. It's a radical idea. All kinds of reasons why it won't work, but you've already signed on because you're in the room, so you know it's part of the cost of admission. So this session, what this map does is respond to that question: is what forces explain the level at which the peacebuilding practice is currently understood, accepted, and valued, and the current level of cohesion among those using the practice. So that was the inquiry they started with that spurred the building of the map that you have in front of you. The question for us now is, where are there opportunities for leverage in this concept, this view of the system? And that's what we're going to do, sort of wisdom of crowd, to help figure out. Nikolai and I will do a bit of an overview of the map. That's why we gave you individual copies, is you're going to be working on them. And we have what we call a narrative key. I might demonstrate. So this is basically a description of each loop in this map. We have the wall versions and each loop separate here, so if you want to walk up and work off this, it's great. We'll have you work probably in pairs, if not threes, to apply this methodology for finding leverage that, again, I'll talk about in a minute. We'll have you do that separately so as not to have groupthink, because if we all start to do it together, we're just going to follow, the temptation is to follow what the person before us did. So we have a stock in the 3M company, so we have lots of Post-its for you to use. So we're literally going to have you mark up the map with Post-its and then transfer how you mark them up to one of the two maps. And those maps are going to be, that's why we have the big ones on the wall. So they're actually going to be receptacles for your analysis, for what your thoughts are. So we're going to go through, as we go through the description of the map, and as we're going to give you time to actually play with it, sit with it, read the narrative key, look at the map. Be thinking of these are what we use as potential indicators of leverage in a map. So when you look at a system, you ask these 4 questions. So where is the system frozen? So of the various dynamics that we'll talk about, of the different factors that we'll talk about in the map, some of them are going to be like not going to change in my lifetime or for the next generation or whatever it is, right? So it's useful to know where it's frozen, because those are probably not the places you're going to find leverage. You get leverage by actually working with energy that's already in the system. It's like systems jujitsu, as a colleague of mine calls it. So the other 3 are, where is there energy for change? Could be energy that's blocked and sort of latent. It could be energy that's being expressed very meekly. It could be negative energy that needs to be sort of either channeled in a different direction. You'll find in these maps that you'll see areas where there's a mixed bag, where the same dynamic or the same factor sometimes has positive impacts and sometimes has negative impacts on the system. We call that a mixed bag. So the purple color there is for marking a mixed bag. You can't read it, but the yellow, or that bright yellow, is where are there bright spots. So these are, in the social sciences, social scientific terms, are the positive deviants, the things that are counter to the trend but really positive. And these are like the minority stories that are sort of in some ways hidden in a complex system. So marking those things that you think are bright spots is useful to get. So I want to lay those out now, because as we go through this, we're going to go through it fairly fast and fairly high level. And as you reflect individually, this is what we want you to mark the system for. Right? This is what we're crowdsourcing in this session right now. All right? That was really quick. If there's just questions for clarity at this point, before we launch into the map. We're all roughly on the same bus? They will come down from there. We'll hand out the posters as we go through. So actually, it would be a good time to do those, like the arrow ones. Yeah, exactly. Those, just a selection for each table. The fidelity of the color, it kind of loses something as we get up on the map here. I've got to switch computers. Do you know how to flip this one? Flip it from this one to this one. Yeah, so we've got placemat size maps that we've spread out, and people are going to have to like triple up probably on these. So I'm going to walk through not each loop in this map, but basically the basic regions of the map. The part to really walk through is what we call, so you can kind of see from this, the way the map is laid out and the way it's color-coded is that region in the middle, okay, I think it's not, there it is. It's not showing up. So the region in the middle, that sort of yellowish color, is what we call the deep structure. Oh, out on the wall, okay. Joanne's telling me technology is not my friend, and I should do it on the wall. This region here is what we call the deep structure. So these are the sort of core dynamics that really shape the system. And and again, these are representative of the kind of stories that we heard. So and Nikolai, you chime in here when I get this wrong. Starting with this loop down here is called the growth and effectiveness ceiling. That it really has to do with the inherent difficulty of what it is we're trying to do, and the gap between, so we have basically a strain on the adequacy and sustainability of funding for the field. Everybody, I work for a donor, even we would not say we have more cash than we know what to do with, but how many of you are like, if you're flush with cash, could you raise your hand? You're just a contrarian, Chip, so. Right, so even though all overall funding for the field for things called peacebuilding has probably increased over the last 10 to 20 years, the adequacy and sustainability of that money is still difficult and stress-inducing, which causes more competition in the field for resources. That competition decreases our ability to be cohesive as a field and to take sort of broader action, which decreases the ability to implement more holistic and adaptive practices, which we know we need in these very complex environments, which reduces our perceived effectiveness as a field. And as our effectiveness as a field goes down, so does the adequacy and sustainability of funding. So this is a vicious dynamic, which is sort of puts a ceiling on how fast and how far we can go as a field. This is compounded by an attempt, I would call a fix that fails in that loop number 2, the short-term solutions gap. So if our effectiveness is not where we want it to be, does that work? Can people is it better if I just work off here, or would that be easier? Yeah.
Because you said it, but it was very quick, and then you used different language, and now we're going into it.
Yeah.
Just got one sentence one more time.
So I'm Italian, so I'm genetically prone to talk really fast. So what AFP is asking is what are the forces that are constraining basically the effectiveness and the health of the field, the impact and the health of the field. And what we try to produce is to identify the various forces that answer that question. So these dynamics are basically stories that Nikolai and Quinn and we captured in the focus groups of what are the forces that either enable us to have impact and be healthy as a field, and what are the forces that hinder us from doing that. And the idea is, to really be helpful with what's going on in the cloud. This is an attempt to understand the cloud. So our cloud, our peacebuilding cloud, has this mixture of interconnected, interdependent forces. So what we're trying to do is call some of them out, give them a name, try to understand them, so that instead of falling victim to any one of them, we can take a step back, see what the overall maze that we're all trying to operate in, and then try to find a better way that we can work together to change the maze, to change the system that we're working in. Does that help, Andrew? Yeah? So the deep structure are sort of the core dynamics that are shaping the difficulties in being more impactful and being healthier as a field of peace building. So there's just sort of this inherent difficulty of the job we're doing and the amount of resource that we have to do it with. There's an attempt to sort of, I think, fix that by, so there's when we see outcomes as they're not where we want them to be, there's this priority the donor interests kind of are prioritized in the name of trying to get demonstrable, short-term, quantifiable impacts. Right. So we're not where we want to be. Let's really push hard to get there. Let's apply a clock fix to a cloud problem. That's a story of this loop. And so what happens is, because we're so focused on short-term quantifiable outcomes, we tend to underinvest in long-term and adaptive approaches, which further actually decreases our ability to be effective as a field. So it's one of the other strong headwinds we face is this sort of short-term solutions gap. This was referred to, I think, earlier about another sort of suppressing dynamic here is this sort of security narrative, the securitized response cycle, the loop 3, which talks about peacebuilding being seen as soft, drives more political support for hard power solutions, increases popular support for securitized approaches, further decreasing the adequacy and sustainability of the funding that we face, which further impedes our effectiveness as a field. That's the core story, right? So it's, again, not the story, but it's one way of trying to understand what's the core of the problem, of the challenge that we face as a field. And it sort of revolves around these three dynamics. The sort of ceiling on our effectiveness and adequacy of funding that we face, the sort of fix that fails around short-term accountability that decreases effectiveness over the long term, and securitized narratives that just decrease the appetite for the kind of work that we do. Right? A little bit of a perfect storm, but wait, it gets worse. No. So what happens in these regions is that this blue region are dynamics that originate from how we work in the field. So it's sort of the relationship between peace builders and grassroots organizations. It's grappling with complexity. It's partnership. In this field, there are a mixture of mostly negative, vicious, or stagnating dynamics, things that make things worse or keep them from getting better. There are some virtuous cycles, some positive things here too. Well, I'll show you in a minute. I've got to show you up on that screen, but I can isolate for you the loops that are virtuous in this, and I have a cheat sheet. So basically, it's in the blue region here. There are 3. There's 4, 8, and 11.
They're also listed in the narrative key as well.
Yeah, and these are all listed in the narrative key. They distinguish which loops are of what variety. It's important to know that because systems change often means working with the positives and not just working to counter the negatives, even though we tend to be very sort of problem-focused folks. So this field down here is how we work with people on the ground. Would you add to that, Nikolai?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of stories. There's way too many stories embedded within this map to cover in an hour and 15 minutes. This workshop would be a 6-hour or a full-day workshop. So we're going to ask you to be charitable and generous and engage very quickly with the narrative keys which are in front of you. But maybe instead of going through all 27 of the individuated but interconnected stories in this map, we can draw on what some other comments from this conference have kind of opened up for us with. So if you saw Bridget Moy speaking yesterday, she mentioned the recognition gap as an issue. Local peace builders on the ground don't feel like their efforts are recognized, and at times this is a bigger impediment to working effectively than the funding issue. So if you're concerned with the recognition gap, you may want to look at what we have up here, gaps 5, professional distance, or loop 5 or loop 10. Bridget mentioned the resource gap also. You may want to take a quicker look at loop 12. You can read about this in the narrative as well. The solutions gap, Bridget mentioned, that would be loops 13 or 14. That idea kind of figures on into there. Peter Woodrow's talk mentioned a number of other issues that peace builders should be engaging on to build a more cohesive field. You find those stories embedded in this map as well. So he mentioned being wary of neutrality, of political neutrality. Well, in a kind of indirect way, Loop 4 addresses that issue. Being concerned about scale and being willing to take on big, grand challenges as a way not only of attempting those grand challenges, but of gaining a seat at the big kids table, so to speak. You might find that in Loop 17. And then there's been a lot of talk at this conference on the growing and fascinating intersection between the peacebuilding field and civil resistance studies and civil resistance movements. You'll find elements of that in Loop 27. So you'll have to be a bit charitable and kind of work your way through these loops quickly. We really appreciate that. You recognize that there's many stories embedded in here, and and we've got a lot to do.
And just at a very high level, this is about the security narrative, the forces that drive the security narrative. This is more sort of how we work as a field, as opposed to working with people on the ground. This is the policy-related dynamics, right? So I think what we want to do, if as you have questions, it might be better to take those. Nikolai and I will wander around. We maybe can talk to your groups. The time is best spent right now is having you, in a small group, engage with this. You've got the key, you've got the map, you've got the post-its, if we can switch back to the other computer. Can we switch back to the other computer? So as you go through this, now actually take those post-its and put them on the map that you have in front of you. And eventually, as you get some consensus, put them up on the oh, right. Right, so here's the key. You should have corresponding post-its that correspond to those colors. Use those to mark the corresponding part on your map. What's frozen? Where is there energy? Where is there a mixed bag? Where are there bright spots? Yeah, so so were there are there more blues?
Start where we want on the map, or
Yeah.
are we supposed to start?
No. So start where you're drawn. Start where you're drawn. But just try to work through as much of the map as you can. So yeah, I know some folks don't have all these colors. We will take care of that. We'll take care of that. I got to run and get some.
So you can either identify positive loops or elements within the system that you see as going right.
helpful to have things laid out visually rather than reading like a 20-page report on something. Yeah, thanks. I try to express it that way too, so yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to help. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. And I'm glad that I get to sit in on such interesting panels. It's such a fantastic opportunity. So.
On the causal connection, which is the arrow, or on the loop name, right? So feel free to mark any of those. Someone's saying, yeah, of course, that's what we did already. But right, just to clarify, it can be any of those three. Thank you very much. Good. We're almost on schedule. Yeah, you could say the loop. Yeah, exactly. The loop is where there's energy or where there's whatever, yeah. Or not. Yeah, it could be the loop that's frozen. I haven't gotten a hug yet. I almost couldn't do this because I hadn't gotten a hug yet. Just I'm telling you, like right now, I really had to pull it together at the last minute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
How are you?
Yeah, it's a public actually. Yeah.
I can't see anything. I can't see the back.
Can you give Dinah the Kumu get her on this?
Absolutely. I can't see with my glasses.
Okay. So,
Rob, normally I would say it's wonderful to see you, but under these circumstances, I'm not sure.
it's torture, kind of.
So where would I go? Dots? No, those are my dots.
How does she get? Yeah, go. She should just like. Can she search for the map?
I don't know how easy it's going to be. Maybe the easiest thing would be for me to add you as a collaborator.
Okay.
Okay.
Because then it'll show up on your. It'll show up on your dashboard.
No, I just wanted to kind of see what was happening. Yeah, but that'd be great if you could give me an
Mixed bag. I think it's media mayhem. It's a mixed bag, right? Because it's such, be careful, it's such mayhem.
I might use this later.
That gentleman over there, the African man, gave it to me.
Oh, he gave it to you.
very good.
I might use it later, but for now we're okay. I think. Do you need anything? Let's see what everybody else does.
This descriptor would also play in scientific advocacy. Maybe you think of it as a specific feature of the where within this set of relationships, I would
if you need to, we've got each loop. Sometimes it's hard to actually understand what the loops are when it's printed like this.
Yeah.
So if you have to bounce back and forth. I'm glad you're up here. You're leading the way. We were just debating whether we should encourage people to come up. Like that's why we put them here. So
I
people.
like big map.
Yeah. When I think those guys said we could make any side you want, I'm like going, really? Like, hold on.
You sure? The biggest one.
Even better.
I have to pick up my kids.
Oh, well, you gotta. You guys
We
are.
got some-
I think you actually maybe have the most post-its on your map. You guys are in
Oh.
first place right now.
Yeah.
So.
I'm
so you-
leaving.
yeah. So
I'm
yeah.
leaving.
Go out on top.
But yeah, leverage. I
There we
will
go.
leverage that area.
I'm Kayla, by
Hey,
the
Kayla,
way.
Rob.
I really love your book.
Oh, thank you. Good.
Yeah, I would spend time. Yay! And you see, they have purple and yellow there.
You guys see, you're too familiar with this, so it's like you're disqualified because you know too much. So
No.
you're too systemic already.
No, we're not going to win a prize.
No, because when Quinn
Oh,
did this presentation,
there are valuable
for us-
cash prizes now.
No, I
What's up?
wanted to. This is my first time getting to actually
Oh, that.
participate.
Okay.
So
All right. So you're like, oh, okay. Then
I know it.
you
but
still
I
qual.
haven't
You're
got
still
to
in the
say
amateur
it.
category.
Oh, totally.
Oh, good.
Yeah, big time.
Not the
amateur.
jaded veteran. Like,
Absolutely in a jaded amateur.
I need to talk. So as you're working in your groups, you've got about another few minutes. We'd like to, as you work in your groups, you can start to migrate what you've posted on your placemat up to the wall. So basically what we want you to do is whatever you've marked on your placemat, transfer those post-its to one of the two big maps. So these are for collecting. We've got two receptacles to collect basically the wisdom of the group now. So what's great is that you're all looking at different parts of the system, you're tagging different things. Now we want to see the collective sense of what you've tagged. So, so right now, if you feel like you've got a spot where you've gotten through what you want to get through, start to migrate your post-its onto one of the two big maps. Same post-its.
There was some struggle at first. Do you think people are coming around? It seems like people are.
Most people are, yeah. Some people are just discussing, which is fine.
Ask you a quick question. Yeah. How does this compare with your map?
Professor Hill teaches me.
Oh, really?
And one of the books is Making Peace Last. It's your book. It's an awesome book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nowhere in our map do we say that underfunding is a problem.
That was awesome.
In your map.
Nowhere in our map do we talk about underfunding is a problem.
Great.
And I think sort of and so relate to that. Obviously, relates quite strongly to the Monday,
is it worth?
Tuesday.
I should have showed.
I also think sort
I
of
should have showed that. Yeah.
we haven't really talked about
That's what it looks like when you're done.
sort of
Should I put it
perceptions of peace or securitized approaches.
Should we leave that up?
No, we do one. That makes sense.
No.
So
it's
some
not
of the
clear.
landing of like we get the right perception of peace out.
Okay.
It's quite interesting. But we were just, I was Lexi's our fellow, and we were just talking about the changing youth norms. Perhaps one thing that struck us is like,
It's actually very beautiful.
don't know, like Lexi's like 21, 22. I'm like, are your friends all talking about peace? Are they peace activists? She's like, no, I see more polarization. I see, she's like, Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace. This is like, there's more mobilization. Almost like she's flagging the tension with the peace agenda, that it's not cool. Like peace, it's not a cool narrative.
And it's not seen as something you do as a movement.
Yeah. So anyway, so I don't know what struck you. Frankly, as a team, perhaps we don't have that longevity of perspective
so much fun to
on the
watch
field.
every time.
Do you know, like, so it's kind of really interesting in this context.
So that's what they end up looking like.
And so I think those are possible.
That's one. That's not
I
this
think
one.
it's worth
obviously, but
like
this one.
conversion or somehow like add groups or somehow.
I mean, if
You
you're
know what?
comfortable
One
with
thing I
it,
was thinking is like,
super
I
comfortable
think
with
it's a
You,
shame.
or not, you
people
see,
are not.
you see mess.
You know,
right, and being like, whatever,
It took me a while to come around.
to that, yeah,
Being
Messy.
playful as well.
yeah, yeah.
So there's no, they don't have everything mapped here. There's a map, there's a positive, and then this direction. And this goes up, this was demand for
So after they're sort of done with this phase, we're going to have people like give observations of what they've seen, and they might need the mics at that point. I know they're around somewhere, but I lost track of them. Not everybody's going to want one, but yeah, they need it.
Oh, look at that. We even have a little fee. I didn't pay money.
We'll work through a little bit of it. We won't get through as much of it as we would want to do. Like, so there's like a group sense making you have to do next. Like, just the post-its is like a start, but then you got to sort of say. So we this is like a navigational tool. It's like saying, look here, not there. And then you say, but in here, what's the actual opportunity? So you have to name it. We're gonna, if we can get to it.
So any of these nodes, right, are these then sort of like explosions of these nodes at like a
Those are the
fractal
individual
level?
loops. Yeah.
Okay.
Those are the loops that are actually in that map.
So okay, so these are all just basically
Yeah,
the
we just
molecules
pull them
that
apart.
build up the
Totally, totally.
But what about like, for example, one node? If I want to unpack it into its disaggregated elements.
So if you want to go deeper,
Yeah.
so what we talk about level of zoom. Oh, actually,
Yes.
Take this do one and say, more of the system that's underneath this. So what is the system? Take global pieces and integrate all these elements that drive around. You might not want to
This is a level, and then you can go deeper.
and then once you know where you want to go,
But mechanically is then the idea that you would just name a new map based on one particular node.
so in theory, you have the ability to either create a new project or a new view within this network size.
Okay. And that new view would be based on one particular node that we expanded.
Good to go. It'll like switch views and it'll blow something out. Good
So we've got about 3-4 minutes to finish posting. So you haven't posted, don't hold back. Don't be selfish.
Strong governance, strong in regards free flow of information.
So put them on that.
I mean, one thing that we found
We need to see the cumulative effects. I'm sorry to.
Based on our analysis, here's the current state.
I see.
Quarters.
Oh, is that real time? No. Yeah. That's someone else. Yeah.
That's a
not
previous
like
example. That's a different map, but that's what it looks like when you get. Not quite that idea.
Yeah, so Rob, I just talked with Elise and Harry. Would there be a way someone to work on that or to put some of the groups? We were just talking like about the under-resourced issue. She said didn't show up in their map at all.
Yeah. I think we should take that map and move it closer to this map for the next section. So maybe even now we should.
Rob, do you have a minute? Okay.
Let me grab some. Okay, someone taller than me. Sorry, even we might just have them hold for a second, move it, and then have them finish.
Because then they see if
Compared to
everybody's
your
focused on one thing or another. I promise you.
I have my focus is on elevating the
I'm happy to see you. I miss being here, and it's thanks to Liz that I'm here.
It's one of the things that keeps
Consulting and
practice star for
so
research.
she gave me a big discount.
You know, I sort of believe that
Yeah,
if you,
it's really great.
because there's so little awareness of
It's
Peacebuilding,
all worth it. I haven't been home in
people
4
don't
weeks.
think of it
So I flew
as a solution.
home last night
And
from
therefore,
Istanbul,
very little resources
which was
is
the
given
other
to
thing I meant to be here for yesterday.
you know, the field is starved, compromised. They can't do more.
Dynamics of like times 12.
I really feel that there's a direct
You know,
relationship between
No, I got back here and everybody was like,
I want to
I gotta be someone had a problem with it. I
so that more people see
spent
it
the
as a
whole time with a
solution,
Turkish friend,
resource
and I mean,
You're
it was
very
very much
quick.
like,
Yeah, no,
Trump's
it's a
crazy,
hypothesis.
Trump's crazy, like what else is new?
Yeah,
It wasn't,
so to do, you know,
it just seems like things have evened out since the election. That is actually the case. Like, and they're, I've been in Cyprus, in Lebanon, and in
right in the belly of the
all
beast.
3 cases, people were like,
New
well,
York Times
you know,
Center.
our politics are bad, our people are really bad, you guys are just part of the crowd now, like, welcome. It was very much like part of the new normal. In North Korea, like, that's what people kept saying. Trump's just one of the many crazy ones. Which is so different from, I was in Jakarta during the election, and then in Bangladesh right after the election, and then people were like panicking, like, what does this mean for Muslims? You know, like, how should we bring our kids home from college who are in the U.S.? Like, they were really worried, and it seems like that worry has kind of mellowed into, yeah, this acceptance. Oh, it's troubling, but on the west side, it's like people are ready.
Yeah. So let's hang out the rest of the post-its. So a stack on this table.
Let me show you. This is the map of the Peacebuilding field. It's like how the different parts of the field relate to each other. So like resources are going to make it harder.
Oops, sorry.
And it makes you panicky thinking about
Yeah, so then the different colors. Everyone had a map, and they were doing an analysis. I'm so sorry.
You never have enough. All right, there's more work to do. You're not done. Like we constant flow of work here. We're really extractive and exploitative people. So. Brighter the better. Okay. So we can come back together as a group. I want to offer thanks and congratulations on populating the map. I mean, what's up there is a picture of not this map, but a different exercise. It's what it tends to look like at this stage. So no good deed goes unpunished. So now the task is to start to make sense of what the group has thought. Now, it'd be even more dramatic if these two were merged, but we knew we didn't have enough time to do that. So kind of if you look across these two, which will be fully populated in about 30 seconds, right, folks? So what we want to do next is have people look at how you, as a group, tagged the system. Like, what is it that you're seeing in the system? So what's the wisdom of the crowd, right? So what are people saying as where are there opportunities? What parts of the map present opportunities? What parts of the system are sort of no-go zones, or at least initially, that you don't want to start with? So part of what we want to do is have you get that. And again, I'll preview the next two tasks, which is why we had to hand out even more Post-it notes to you. If you don't have them, we will get them to you. What we're going to ask you to do is actually name a potential opportunity for leverage that exists in one of those areas. Right? So if you were to look across the two maps, kind of imagine in your mind's eye that they were merged. Where are some parts of the map that are saying, hey, this looks like an area where there's an opportunity for leverage? What do you see?
It's about whether if I just drove the whole way.
Yeah, we got a microphone to pass around if anybody wants to.
About that, if I'm not a registrant.
Right. So blue is frozen. The sort of pink are where there is energy for change that could be tapped into. There are a few purples, which are mixed bags that sometimes have positive impacts on the system and sometimes have negative impacts on the system. And the yellow is a bright spot. Yeah, Eileen. I'll be your.
Thank you. You be my eyes. It looks like the upper right, at least on this, right there, with the around the youth thing, looks like a leverage point.
Great. Changing youth norms.
Yeah, because there's a lot of energy for change.
Current political climate, media coverage. Right. There's a lot up here.
Yeah.
It's interesting in this one. It may just be the sampling, but that there's a lot of blue also in this area. Right, so I mean so I don't know if people want to speak to, if anybody put blue or put, so if we can get someone to speak for what they saw as, energy or mixed bag, as opportunity, or what you saw as being frozen. Yeah.
From our perspective, it was a discussion as to is it a way it is or the way it could be. It's more of a potential as opposed to the way it is at the moment.
Right. So I think a lot with sort of energy, like it could be what it could be. Like there's energy. It's doing something. It may not be doing the thing that we want it to do, but it's not frozen. Frozen meaning it's good or bad. It's not going to change much in the foreseeable future. Yeah.
So Rob, what's the qualitative difference between the pinks and the yellows?
When we do a really simplified version of this, we just have one category. So the pink, so yellow is basically, you can observe it having a certain positive impact, even if it is just a positive deviant. The pink, it may not actually be causing anything to happen, but it's sort of latent. So the idea that there's latent energy could fit in the pink category, not just things that you can observe happening, but that you see it in there. Other thoughts, other observations you get by looking at across the maps and how they were tagged. Where are there opportunities? Where are there possibly no-go zones or areas to watch out for?
I think someone who is that senior should be able to take.
Yeah.
Well, that's what he kind of said and tried to.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's 2017 says a lot about why there's so many stickers there in the upper right. It just seems like that there's just a lot of energy and concern, potential around both the political climate and also the rapidly shifting media ecosystem. So I'm wondering what this would look like, you know, if it were done 3 years ago, and to what degree then the sort of how time sensitive these are. You know, would we, you know, if we, in 4 years, would this look radically different, or at least somewhat different as part of it? So that just stood out to me as one, you know, one kind of observation about how is this driven by current events.
So one of the things we try to capture when we do these is not to be overly, like, try to capture things that are current patterns in the system. So even though they might be more prominent at one time or the other, that they were there. One of the Humanity United maps was on, dealt with bonded labor between Nepal and Qatar. And they did their maps, they got their strategy approved. 4 months later, massive earthquakes in Nepal, right? And so I got a phone call from a member of the team who said, like, what do we do now? And I said, well, look, is there anything in your map that sort of helps you make sense of the earthquake response? And he goes, oh yeah, we have this household marginalization loop that is happening in spades. So even though the event may be wildly shifted and dramatic, what are the underlying patterns that are driving that? We tried to get to that. Now, it may be overly influenced by the current climate, but that's part of what we want to see. And I think it's part of how we're interpreting it now, too, that at least those are, have energy and are susceptible to change. Even if they're not where we want them to be right now.
I mean, this morning Peter Woodrow commented that it might seem like things are changing really fast, so rapidly that we can't keep up, like a daily dose of shock therapy. But I think there are some underlying patterns here that even if we might be feeling them more intensely in 2017, I mean, media coverage of violent events is not a new thing. This has been ongoing. If it bleeds, it leads. Feelings of insecurity and vulnerability, particularly within the United States, and how that triggers responsiveness towards more securitized type solutions to complex problems. This is not a new thing. This has been happening for quite a while. And a kind of feeling of fear in the other, right? So these patterns are really deeply ingrained, according to the feedback we got in our process, within American culture in particular. Not just American culture, though this is a kind of U.S.-centric map.
Yeah, great. There's a couple of there's several other hands up. So right here, and we'll go around this way.
Thank you. I'm just surprised at the spectrum of perceptions that's there in this room, because, for example, on the left-hand side of the map, we see how one side perceives sustainable peace building and systemic holistic programming as positive, and a seat at a table with major actors is definitely, like, I would see it as an opportunity for change, whereas on the other map we see 3 frozen tabs over there. That's quite surprising, and I want to understand the logic behind how differently we perceive these opportunities.
Great. Yeah, so so I don't know if anybody has a quick thought on that. So either why they posted it as frozen, or why they might have posted it as energy for change. Anybody want to speak to that? I mean, so this is part of what the map helps us do, is to facilitate collective sense making. So if you're in a room, if it's 5 people or 50 people, it's really interesting to see where we have seemingly different perceptions of the same force that exists in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hi, Rob. My question is once you find out where you would like to leverage your skills or your tools, how does this map tell you the who you address? Because you're looking at forces and factors, but how do I know that I need to then address these 3 NGOs who may be dragging the system down, or these 5 NGOs who are bright spots in the system, and reinforce that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll do a quick answer on that one, then I want to come back to the interpretation of the map. So largely, we encourage our teams to do sort of actor mapping, but around systems. So there's any number of ways you can organize an actor map. One way to organize it is around who's being active and on potential opportunities for leverage. So it may be that if an opportunity for leverage is being addressed by several great organizations, it may not be the one you want to go to. right? And it may also be people you want to reach out and talk to. So doing actor mapping in conjunction with this oftentimes is really, really helpful. But usually after you have an idea of where you want to go. There was a hand back there. Anybody want to talk to the different perceptions of the seat at the table question?
Yeah, I think our group was one of the ones who identified seat at table with major actors as a area with some energy. And for speaking for myself at least, this idea kind of came out of a conversation we had yesterday about someone asked a question in a session about mentorship and how to have youth involved really actively in the process and not just sort of as a token, like, oh, we consulted with youth, or oh, here's a token woman on the panel, so we're being diverse and inclusive. So yeah, it seemed like if that was actually happening, it could be, there could be a lot of energy there and potential. So that was why we put that there. And then if maybe people who see it as stuck would want to address that.
So who saw it more as a frozen factor? Yeah. Is it up here?
I think this speaks to what somebody said before as well, that even though it could definitely be something that has energy for change, or how do you want to say it, currently there is still a lot of room for improvement, and we are not getting there yet, or that energy that is necessary to make that change hasn't been made or created yet. So I think that's why we say for now we're really not there yet, and it depends. It's very different, I think, if you look in the US or if you look at, say, smaller countries in Europe, but there's a lot would likely need to change there.
Great. Let's take a few more comments on the overall map.
We've got 15.
We got 15 minutes, great. Now I'm like totally blinded by hands in the air. So I know you had your hand up. I don't know if we've talked to you. There's one over here too. Yeah. Okay, let's go here and then here.
Just to comment on just our thinking process as a group. It was interesting to see how what moved something from frozen to a mixed bag or to bright spots is realizing that sometimes there is change that's happening, but these narratives of change are not being amplified enough. And that's a kind of a recurrent theme throughout this conference also. Yeah.
Great.
One of the things I noticed, just where do we find the most numbers of stickers? And I think that says a lot about, obviously, what's happening in our society, in the political area, the media, a ton. But down there at the bottom on the support of the military for peacebuilding, there are nine stickers there, and they're from yellow to, no blues, but everything else.
Yeah, you get the range of colors, right?
It calls out for us the question about, on the one hand, the military has saved peacebuilding's butt in this town.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that has obviously raised some questions for peacebuilders everywhere. So just the size of the circles almost could be expanded to reflect the interest in how the power of the forces.
Great, great. I want to come this way. I want to make sure I get the hands. We had a hand over here?
It was about the military.
About the military? Great. And then Bob? Same question. So I'm going to keep coming right this way. Susan?
Hi.
Bob wants to reclaim. He didn't quite give up the floor.
Go for it.
Recycle. So what do you do when you see the military thing like that? When you see a case of that, what is the next step for that you would recommend?
If we have time for it, I'd love to go to this. So what we wanted you to do, and we're going to ask you to do this just after we get these last couple comments, is on these Post-its, if you have a particular idea for how to do that, right? So this basically is saying, this looks like a promising area to go in. Okay, so the question is, how do you want to go? Like, name it. Say what it is. Say what you would do. So this is for if you have an idea of how to go after this opportunity, put it on this one. This is like your specific idea of suggestion for going forward or actually engaging the map, is this. We'll get to this. But also, we're going to use the other Post-its. We're going to give you a chance to talk about next steps, like what are your, if you've got comments or questions about the map itself. We've got the blue Post-its, and the pink Post-its are for next steps, or if you want to be involved or you've got ideas for that, it's the pink. So let me go back through that. The yellow is if you've got a specific idea of how to do this, if you've got an idea of how to engage the military, put it on the yellow. Comments on the map is blue, and ideas for next steps as a process for AFP is the pink. I'll come back over that, but let me get the last couple of hands in the air. Yeah, Susan.
Okay, so I was intrigued by this, in the far right, lavender, separation with nonviolent social movements leading to peacebuilding heroes, and then a long line going to political support for hard power solutions. It almost seemed like peacebuilding heroes were positioned as a somewhat negative.
So what we're saying here is that the separation between social movements and the professional sector of peacebuilding actually, think maybe less specifically and more broadly about how that disconnect and how the disconnect between the tools that social movement activists and the tools that peacebuilders both bring to the table and can potentially create synergistic energy out of, how the absence of that actually leads to a decline in interest in social movements and leads to a weakening of the ability of social movements to cause change. It can also lead to a kind of siloed effect where social movement activists don't look at or think about peacebuilders, and people in the professional sector don't look at or think much about the tools of social movements altogether. So what we're saying here, now actually we probably should have addressed this before, but the plus means an increase in something, and then the minus means a decrease in something. So the disconnect or separation between social movements, the more that these kind of ways of engaging with the world are siloed, the weaker that you're going to see the ability of peacebuilding heroes or social movement heroes, because those collaborative tools are going to be off the table. And the weaker peacebuilding looks as a field, and the weaker the inabilities of social movements are to challenge power, then you're going to see an increase in political support for hard power solutions, because they look like they're the only solutions that work for that matter.
Good. So any other just comments about the map and the opportunities for leverage? I know there's probably a lot out there, but none you want to get out now. We've got about 8 minutes left, and so I really would like to just, again, harvest kind of the wisdom of the crowd a bit. So the invitation is on a yellow Post-it to maybe start with really we just need answer to number 2 up there. How would you start to affect that part of the map? Like, what action would you take? So if you've got specific suggestions, put them on here, or ideas that you'd like to see try out. It could be relative to any part of the map or any opportunity for leverage. And then as advice for AFP in terms of moving this process forward, if you've got comments or questions on the map, write them on the blue Post-its. If you've got suggestions or ideas for next steps or want to be involved, put them on the pink Post-its, the 3x3 square Post-its. And again, as you got them, don't be shy. Put them up just post them up, right? This is how we'll harvest your ideas. You can put your ideas for action next to the leverage point. You can put your blue or pink Post-it next to the area of the map it relates to. All right? So this is a sprint. We've got about 7 minutes to get through all of this. So get your ideas, as many as you can get down, and post them up.
We need blue and pink.
Okay, got it.
Look at that right here at the very end, just reminding people. Thank you.
Anybody else need blue and pink?
Okay. Sure. Is this the last event today?
This is the last event today, yes.
Okay.
So just remind
It's
people,
raining Post-its.
keep their badges.
Which one?
To bring their clothes.
Okay.
Just put them up anywhere. Yeah. If you've got, if it's a question about a part of the map, put it by that part of the map.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Did you want us to say anything as we close things out about the conference, besides keep your badges and keep your schedule?
Just if it relates to part of the map, put it close to the part of the map. So if it's about military, put it there. Perfect.
So amazingly,
Thanks.
gave this and explained it so crisply. And it's really impressive.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that.
So if it's not here at all, maybe put it like around the top.
It's
Okay,
a
so
living,
Yeah,
document.
or put them over here. Just,
Yeah.
That's really helpful to get.
Which is about women's
Perfect.
50% of the world are not mentioned on this map at all.
Great. No, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Which which I find bizarre.
Yeah.
I have to say,
Yeah.
completely extraordinary.
Yeah.
There is nothing around.
Yeah. Well, it's in some ways it's a,
women's resurgence and movements in the
Right.
world. There's just nothing there. It's like bizarre.
and this is just a reflection of what they've heard so far.
But I mean, how can they not have heard that?
Yeah,
Like, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, no, that's perfect feedback.
Bewildering.
Yeah.
I just wanted to come closer to see if I actually missed it. But no, it's not here, right?
I'm sorry, a question about whether if you what you've heard about. You got it. Yeah.
So, I mean, it was part of like the whole mapping process. Like but because it's the sort of thing that doesn't, you can't like plunk it down into any one sort of space. And this is a thing we struggle with when we're talking about any form of oppression, right? Like the access between race and peacebuilding, the access between youth oppression and peacebuilding. And what we had a hard time doing is saying like women's empowerment and women's participation belongs here or belongs here. It's really part of like we thought of it as sort of like one of these things that's in the atmosphere that saturates all of it.
But all it does by not, you mean, you've even got youth listed here. As if youth changing movements around peace.
Everything can be,
it's just extraordinary that it's just, it's invisible. It's totally invisible, as if
what we try to do
it
is
doesn't
capture
matter.
both
Whereas actually, the peacebuilding field, if you don't pay attention to the fact that
and not just
war is
privileges that we
basically
know we can,
masculine,
empirical studies validate.
enterprise, it's effectively an enterprise by men across the world. Then the idea that you can look at these building responses and not have women research is just beyond my comprehension. I can't see why wouldn't be there in every space, let alone. But it's not. I mean, that's exactly my point. It's totally invisible. It hasn't been mentioned.
Like I have this time with teams that I work with.
It's
to say, this map is just a reflection of your internal pre-existing assumptions, right?
So this doesn't have anything to do with
there's a bit of what standard they have
and it has nothing
underneath
to do
is what was the process they used to produce the map?
with the system that we exist in.
Go back. So we have
it is like it's not even there. It's so not there that it's a system that we're not even seeing.
So I don't disagree with you about your diagnosis or your assessment. I think the same could be said about class oppression and the fact that like lower class people and the identity of
but women's activism,
you're getting enough of them, you're getting enough diverse ones, and start to amalgamate them to something that
it's not like it's a new thing. I mean, if we had done this in the UK, we would be smack bang in the middle of every, that's why I'm astonished by it. It just doesn't exist.
to show people that.
But you wouldn't dream of not having it on the map. Because it's such an important feature of the work as peacebuilders in the world, which is, work with the incredible energy and pride and passion to make a difference. You can't, I couldn't find anywhere to put that. It's just non-existent.
I think that,
do you see what I mean?
No, this was an issue that we definitely considered deeply.
One of my team's research projects is looking at basically data, better ways of capturing and analyzing all kinds of data, both qualitative narrative data as well as
for me,
See if we can add, from our point of view, it's often a little bit more theory-based map than because of the fairly small sample size. It's a little bit more biased, and I'm interested into thinking that cross-fertilization with big data, middle-sized data, and the small data.
So I don't know whether you want to maybe try and think of how that could be.
What are the options for building out
They do have potentially very most developed.
the folks who
Totally agreed. Yeah, we've identified that as a part of this map that needs to be further developed and iterated. CDA is, you were at the one with it?
I mean, my former colleague, Louis Roy, doing the work with CDA.
I'm Oscar. I'm from Finnish mediation.
Important piece of work. I think it's all learning.
founded by the former president of
potentially positive
I think we have a lot of
Yeah, that would be great.
Absolutely. We've totally tagged that as next iteratives.
Happy to have you continue to work and post. I don't want our time together to escape without me saying first thank you to all of you. Thank you to AFP, and thank you to Nikolai and Quinn, who did the really hard work of producing what you see here and capturing the stories as best they could. So thank you all very much.
Hey, Rob, can I actually see that microphone real quick? Are we finishing up? Yeah. Yeah, I think mine's done. Hello, hello. Okay, just a few quick reminders. Everybody, please, if you're coming back tomorrow, do keep your name badges and your conference programs, the beautiful, very large conference programs. There's not a ton of them, so bring your name badges and your conference programs back tomorrow. And after all this hard work, I'm sure you all need a stiff drink. So absolutely do come to happy hour hosted by Peace Direct, USIP, and the Alliance for Peacebuilding from 6 to 7:30 at the Mission Restaurant, 1606 20th Street Northwest, or ask someone else who knows. So happy hour, 6 to 7:30, and looking forward to getting a drink and hearing your feedback there.
I thought you wanted, if we wanted to get involved, I just thought you wanted my contact information, so that's what I gave you.
That's great, perfect. That's wonderful.
And where did you say we're drinking?
Mission.
Hi. Where?
Mission Restaurant. I don't know where that is. Mission Restaurant, have you been there?
1606 20th Street? Where the heck is that?
I think it's nearby. I'm pretty sure it's right nearby. Do you know where it is?
Down by DuPont Circle, I think.
Down by DuPont Circle?
Oh, so it's not nearby.
Well,
That's what? That's how many, about 6 blocks?
6 blocks? Yeah.
Downhill.
What do you
It feels
like?
like a